Welcome back and thanks for staying with Africa News Network First Fast Live. State-owned enterprises again took center stage in Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba's fiscal plan. He says the government wants to deal decisively with governance and financial failures at the public entities. He backed President Ramaphosa's unequivocal commitment in the State of the Nation address to stabilize and revitalize the companies.
State-owned companies operate network industries such as electricity and transport that underpin our country's economic growth potential. To date, we have managed to secure cabinet approval for frameworks on private sector participation, the appointment of boards and the costing of developmental mandates, to appoint a new board chief executive officer and restructuring officer at SAA, and to implement the long-term turnaround strategy for the entity. And thirdly, to appoint a new board at Eskom. The Minister of Public Enterprises has instructed the entity to conclude all power purchase agreements with independent power producers.
Minister Gigaba has questioned the business model of some of the state-owned companies, calling them unsustainable. He echoed the president's sentiment that their capital structure is too reliant on debt. Ramaphosa has also emphasized on a new funding model for the state-owned enterprises during his State of the Nation address.
The new ownership model will incorporate new methods for funding SOEs, which could include a shift towards a greater mix of debt and equity type of finance. Where circumstances are suitable and where the developmental function of an SOE is not compromised, there may be opportunities to involve strategic equity partners as minority investors in some of our SOEs.
In another radical move, Minister Malusi Gigaba told Parliament that evergreen contracts in companies such as South African Airways must be reviewed and may be done away with.
Government has a number of evergreen contracts which are open-ended. Evergreen contracts create barriers to entry, making it impossible for new entrants to participate in the allocation of government contracts.
And the proposal of bringing in strategic equity partners has encouraged the proponents of a privatization of public entities.
The comments about dealing with corruption, dealing with state-owned corporations that don't fund themselves are welcome, but they're not new. We've heard them many times before. So we hope that now there won't just be talk, this will be translated into action, and we'll see some real action taken. The fact is that Eskom is bankrupt. It's going to have another bailout. It's not going to be able to survive without it. But once that bailout is given, we trust that the right steps will be taken to partly privatize it and to make it sustainable. Other state-owned entities, such as SAA, must simply be sold off.
One of the suggestions is that we will look at equity injections, direct capital injections, but that kind of equity injection by private partners will bring the necessary revenue in SOEs, but we must improve the governance of SOEs or SOCs as well. That's why the president announced that he will be chairing a committee that will oversee the functioning of all the SOEs to ensure that there is a complete review and refocus and redirecting of our SOEs to be efficient.
One's got to look at your SOEs, which is another part of the fraud and corruption that is taking place. Eskom, Transnet, Denel. Again, those are major drains on our fiscus, and we are pleased that there have been announcements made, but we need to see concrete action to ensure that that does not bankrupt the state.
And we thank our guests for indulging us and staying with ANN7, Walter Lukhuleni from the PAC. And we have Mpoma Tebula, political analyst on the phone line, Leon Lowe from the Free Market Foundation. Thanks indeed for your time. Just looking at SOEs and how far South Africa as a developmental state can afford to shed off national assets in the interest of attracting investment. Leon, I'll start with you.
Well, let's first understand they're not national assets. They're actually national liabilities. And something like SA Airways is the opposite of an asset. It's actually a total embarrassment. And as Walter said, you know, why do we spend money, take money from the poor and spend it on the rich who fly? SA Airways, anyone who looks at its numbers must realize it cannot be rescued. You can't, nobody will invest 1 cent in it.
I want to interject there because again, history teaches us a number of lessons, because then when it was Suid-Afrikaanse Lugdiens, then it was the pride and joy as a national symbol in flying the flag abroad, etc. It is an asset because it has the license and the routes and has the ability of turning around. So to write it off simply because of be it management issues and sell it off on the cheap to the highest bidder is also in itself not necessarily the best strategy.
No, let's understand something. These routes, because they have the wrong plans and the wrong routes, cannot run at a profit. In other words, every time a plane flies, you're making the company more in debt. The only way to stop that is to stop the flying. There are very few assets. It has almost no aeroplanes, they leases, it has almost no infrastructure. Now, I'm not talking about SA Airways. Other corporations like Nexa.
But we know why it got to where it did. Again, it comes to leaderships and discussions that were made. I'm not even going to go with Bain and Company. We've done investigations on this particular issue of SAA, that it had been a systematic way of making it dysfunctional so we can justify it being privatized. I can get a view from Mr. Mathebula on what you think in this particular regard, whether we can just willy-nilly sign off on national assets.
Cindy, I'll start by saying there are archived documents that are there. If you recall, 2007, 2008, Ria Pierre chaired a commission on SOA's reformation and strategy. And that document is very explicit. I understand the fact that the president wants to set up a macro approach in terms of dealing with SOEs. But again, the president, I think, is doing the same mistake that the previous or his predecessor has done. To chair a macro structural approach without a strategic approach is as good as saying you're going to fail again. Because these SOEs, all of them, they've got their own unique strategies that they build out. But all of them, they're not having a meta strategy that the presidential office is not monitoring. And what they're saying is that from their micro perspective, the macroness of the strategy and oversight should be done in such a way that the president focuses on the strategy and forgets the structural approach in terms of this. Because an old adage and daffodil says to us, structure always follows strategy. In the absence of a meta strategy by the president, his structural approach is bound to fail. And that has always been a problem, that we create structures without appropriate strategies. Show me an appropriate strategy for all SOEs, which is unified under an oversight function. It's not there.
Mr. Lokolo, you, in your view again, in how we especially use state-owned entities, as we heard, as levers of state that will enable economic transformation. I'll harbour on this particular one because he raised the issue of evergreen contracts that stem from 50 or even longer years from since our democracy. How then are we going to transform the economy while we still have that particular monopoly enjoying lucrative government contracts?
I think that is the fallout of the CODESA discussions, because those were deals that were made to ensure that certain businesses continue to thrive. A business that works on tenders, that has to tender, has to always improve strategy, improve service. But a business that is guaranteed a contract for the next 50 years doesn't have to do anything because you already have the contract. You don't have to do anything to improve. So that's the first thing that we need to get rid of. We need to get rid of those evergreen contracts. But you don't have to... the feeling that I get is that you get the rhetoric that says we'll do that, but we'll do it gradually so that we don't tread on people's toes. The first thing that is a problem is that we know that these SOEs have come to be at this level because of management problems. but we have not seen one manager going to jail. So it's not solving the problem. Even now, the strategies that they claim they will come up with is not a strategy that will actually see people go to jail, firstly, so that it shows to the next person to say, we are giving you this SOE to run at your own peril. If you fail, you've got a key to jail. We don't have that. So basically what we're saying is, if you are a failed politician or you are a failed businessman who supports our political party, the ANC, will park you there. And when we think we've rehabilitated you enough, we'll bring you to government. Yeah, the case of Prime Minister is a classic example. You know?
We also, look at these evergreen contracts in the sense of how would government be able to either not renew or cancel? What are the legalities around it? Because there could be penalties of ending those contracts. But before we continue, we also have Kashif Wickhome, who is a PPF Deputy President. Kashif, thanks so much for your time. Your reaction to the budget speech, I see you released a statement saying you're generally happy with it.
Good evening. Yes, thank you very much. I think there are a number of positives which came out of Minister Gigaba's budget speech. The first of which, of course, is that he has implemented the policy of the ANC conference of 2017 in free basic education. So we applaud that. The second one is around the PPF bill, or the Public Preferential Procurement bill. He said that will be reviewed in March 2018, and we like the fact that there was a time frame attached to that for public review. We also appreciate that VAT was increased by only 1%, and I think here, of course, the public must know that South Africa probably has one of the lowest VAT rates globally compared to its peers, and also this was the first time that VAT was increased since 1993. And also, of course, the fact that quite a few of the essential products which our poorer South Africans purchase are zero rated for that. So
Mr. Wickhome, I just want us to take us in bite sizes, and also for many of our viewers that may not necessarily be in the government procurement space. Now, the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, yes. What is problematic with it as it stands that the professional, or rather that your organization wants to see reviewed?
So first of all, since the triple PFA was implemented, it had a 90-10 split in favor of 90% or 90 points technical and 10 points on BEE. So many times your bigger companies would just write off the 10 points and beat it on price, because the 90% was in price and technical. And as the PPF, we've always held that the 90-10 split must go 50-50, even 60-40 in favor of empowerment and transformation, because we believe that is key to government procurement, and we believe that it's key in terms of transformation and key in terms of job creation. So
what shape ought it to take if we were to almost leapfrog, I suppose, the process? Because all along, many black businesses have been kept out of the loop because of the technical requirements that they could not fulfill.
Yes. So what we're saying is that the technical requirements must not be the majority of that point system when bid evaluation committees sit. And empowerment and transformation and job creation and local content, etc., must be the bulk of the points on which a particular bid is evaluated.
Yeah. Mr. Mathebula, your view whether this process in itself would be generally accepted and welcomed, that we don't necessarily look on compliance or whether you have a history of having done the job, your machinery or even other equipment, for example, that it would be fairer to look at the possibility or the potential of a particular business of doing business with government?
I think we should leverage on the maturity assessment model, which in essence is not existing in the entire government scheme of doing business, particularly in terms of SOEs. I will tell you, there has been attempt to do incubation programs. There has been attempt to do business trainings and all those things. You can try those models, but those modalities will not actually bear any fruit, because there is no concerted effort to be able to check as to whether which are those businesses, where are they? And I thought the SMME by now should have an audit which says what are those emerging businesses that we can incubate and begin to develop a maturity assessment model from level 1 to say it's an entry point and what will be the exit point for them to be able to compete on evergreen contracts and all that. There is no maturity assessment model developed anywhere in this country that takes businesses from zero to the competitive advantage, which are with other businesses. There is no.
Yeah, and I mean, also when you're reliant on a lender as a small business, the financial sector in itself is not very lenient or friendly towards small businesses because of the risk element that you may not have collateral, etc. Is this another reason why we need to have more competition in the banking sector, in your view, Mr. Leon?
Yes, well, firstly, it worries me a lot that everyone talks about SMME's future as how much procurement it gets. The government is 20% of the GDP. If the SMME sector is going to prosper, if small business is going to prosper, it's not going to be thanks to the government. It's going to be in a booming, prosperous economy, and by the removal of the red tape that, for example, the National Credit Act basically makes it impossible for banks to lend to small business. Whether they're competing or not, whether they're more or not, it makes it unworkable and uneconomical. And so that's the first. If Mr. Ramaphosa is correct, that's one of the first things to do is get rid of that act, which diverts capital to the rich. That's what it does. It says if you are very rich, you can get credit. If you're poor, you can't. So that's the sort of regulation that has to be removed. And so let's understand something very carefully. If small businesses and black business and transformation are going to happen in South Africa as any decent person wants it to happen, then it is going to be getting rid of apartheid dinosaurs like South African Airways, and it is going to be getting rid of apartheid laws that were designed under apartheid to keep black people down and are still there today. So we need to actually say the legacy of apartheid that we've kept after Kodesa, to which Walter has referred, is still with us. And we need to actually say the first thing to do is get rid of everything we inherited from apartheid. And I'm sorry to say, you were parties to that Kodesa agreement.
Okay, we'll have that discussion on another day. I just want to talk about, changing the patterns of the economy and having the ability to produce and be a competitive player in this space. If you don't have capital, Mr. Lukoleni, and we'll come to you, Mr. Wickham, as well, and there is no policy reform, essentially the status quo will remain. What can government do? One, to make sure that capital is adequately available and also incur the risk as other companies enjoyed before democracy, and ensure that there is the support or mechanism, as Mr. Matebula was saying, to make sure that the company grows and it thrives.
I think, Cindy, there's two things that we need to always remember. We are coming in at a state where we are saying everything is equal, and it doesn't work that way. Because when you look at the small business, you're starting, as my fellow panelist is saying here, the act of getting money is hampered by the law. Now, government is sitting at the pinnacle of making the rules. So therefore, government is the one that is supposed to say, we are repealing this law, we are creating more competition in the banking sector. This law is not geared towards improving small businesses. Therefore, we're changing this law to ensure that small business can access funding. As things stand now, the rhetoric is that you can do business with government, but to start the business that you're going to do business with government, the barriers are saying you can't do that. So basically we are in a cycle where what I would call a glass ceiling. You can see government opening up to give you business, but you can't cross over because the laws don't allow you to get funding. So
but we saw,
should change that.
This policy in itself had been debated in government, and the PPF, Mr. Wicom, you will give us, correct me if I'm mistaken, that you had been one of those civic groups that were quite vociferous in your objection of the triple PFA, and yet somehow it found itself to the president's inbox. And is this for you at least a sense of a window of opportunity to correct that particular act?
It is, and in fact, I want to go back to your earlier question when you spoke about how does SMEs get access to finance, even if they've got a contract and or they've secured a tender with a particular government department. Now, you know, we find it strange and in fact quite laughable that the state, which controls the PIC, it controls the NEF, it controls all these financial institutions, public funded financial institutions, yet when an SME goes to this institution with a contract in hand, when a property developer goes to these institutions and it has a commercial property to be developed in Soweto or Gugs or Khayelitsha, then the same very strict commercial criteria are applied as a normal commercial bank would apply. Now, where is the empowerment? Where is the commitment to transformation when we as a state are in fact in charge of that checkbook? And we in fact don't want to invest the pension funds of black employees of the state into areas which they live in or at the very least grew up in. So it goes back to these financial institutions to stay and assist SMEs, I think like Mr. Ruiz, your previous speaker, spoke about, to assist them in getting access to funding. The second thing, of course, is that the payment period and the payment cycle of the state far exceed the 30 days, let alone the 14 days which they committed to pay SMEs. And that's why we, as a PPF, said we welcome Minister Gigaba's position that officials who do not pay suppliers within the regulated 30-day period must be held accountable, and that accountability must be managed.
Mr. Wicom, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm sure we'll have ample time for consultation with groups such as yourselves in advising the various committees and commissions on the way forward. That is Kashif Wicom, PPF Deputy President. And very briefly, Mr. Mathebula, in your closing comments on this budget speech, giving us a sense of confidence or rather hope. He did say that it was a tough budget, but nonetheless hopeful for South Africa.
I guess my parting shot will be there's a serious dichotomy of governance here. I want to give a caveat to the new administration that it must never ever play a central role in terms of facilitating business, because government is an enabler. Government, as a performance indicator, should take a lagging role, and the leading indicator should be business. But business must be regulated in such a way that it does not discriminate, there is no prejudice, and there is equalization, and the egalitarianness within it must be able to make all South Africans grow within the economy. But government, because of it wants to take a central role, the mistakes it does, it creates a legislation as the center. And they forget that business is the center. They must take a back step and begin to regulate what they are doing. But if government continues to be the center, it will continue to create pieces of legislation because of it wants to prove its presence. And it is not required, Cindy.
All right, Mr. Mathebula, your time is appreciated. And Paul Mathebula, political analyst. We'll wrap it up very briefly, Walter, in that now with the policy certainty, or is there policy certainty, and much to the satisfaction of investors after the speech?
Look, if you were making a speech for the international world, there is certainty. But if you are making a speech for the citizenry of this country, there's no certainty. Firstly, you are not sure whether the cabinet reshuffle will bring out the best that you have in the country in terms of skills and delivery. Secondly, you also have uncertainty in the sense that the policies that are being put forward, will they actually give leverage to people to start making money in the country. But thirdly, also, you have created a situation that the poor cannot change from being poor, because you are giving them money in terms of social grants, you are giving them some kind of relief in terms of zero-rated food, but you're also increasing their cost by increasing the fuel levy, because the fuel levy will have a direct impact on them, because food prices will go up, transport will go up. So actually
I want to give Leon also just the last word, very briefly, Leon, in your view, that obviously the detail or the devil is in the detail, and we'll have the opportunity to unpack, of course, with the debate and with all the commissions that are coming up.
Yes, I think the biggest problem with this is it's not radical economic transformation. It's business as usual. It really perpetuates everything the way it was before, and we need transformation, that is, to an economy that experiences high rates of growth and job creation and business opportunities for all South Africans. That's what we're not getting out of this budget. We will see in the future whether we move in that direction with a new, much smaller cabinet, leaner and meaner government, and a government that removes all the barriers which have been placed and which unfortunately were repeated in this budget. It shocked me, frankly, that the worst barriers are actually being perpetuated.
Okay, we're going to leave it there, gentlemen. As always, much appreciated reflecting on the budget vote delivered by Minister of Finance, Malusi Gigaba, earlier on today, mentioning certain key aspects that speak to the National Development Plan, that of the National Health Insurance, a free education, and a marginal increase on the Social Security Network. But we'll take a quick break and we'll see you on the other side.